Welcome back to another Spirit Island video. In this video, we're going to be covering the Adversary France. I'm going to use a similar formula to the videos that I made covering Prussia. Basically, I'm going to cover all levels of France in this video, talk about like a general overview, and then I'll be doing individual videos for each level of France, going all the way up from level 1 to level 6. This time I will be doing different spirits. I know in the previous video I did the same spirit for all 6 videos, and I was pretty drained from Thunder Speaker, so I'll be just doing different spirits just to keep things fresh and interesting. With that said, let's get started. So France. France has this loss condition, and this is really the main way that players lose against France. And it says that before setup, return all but 7 towns per player to the box. Invaders win if you ever cannot place a town. Basically, what this means is you have 7 towns that you're allocated per board. It's actually it actually says per player, but basically per board. And if you ever exceed the 7 towns, you lose the game. So, and this is the main way that players lose against France. The escalation, it says after exploring on each board, pick a land of the shown terrain. If it has a building, add a blight. Otherwise, add a town. This escalation is very cool because it gives players a choice. If that land has buildings, you can add a blight. Otherwise, you add a town. And that town add is going to pressure the loss condition, or that blight add is going to pressure the blight loss condition. But the players get to choose how they want to play around it. So, very fun. The first level of France, it says, except during setup, after invaders successfully explore into a land that has no buildings, add an additional explorer to that land. So it says except during setup. So that means the very first explorer of the game, you do not do it. So if we had Mountain Sands Jungle, for Mountain, you're going to explore like normal. If I'm playing on board A, I would explore like normal, and that would be it. We would be done for turn 1. Now, for the Sands, so that second explorer, so now it's turn 2 of the game. Now we start playing with France 1. So if Sands were to explore, I would have 2 explorers in my A4, and then 1 explorer would be in my A7. And that's because there is a building already in A7. And that's the France 1 rule. So the next rule, it says slave labor. It says during setup, put the Slave Rebellion event card under the top 3 cards of the event deck. After invaders build in a land with 2 or more explorers, replace all but 1 explorer with an equal number of towns. The Slave Rebellion is an event that you know as a player, and part of beating France is playing around Slave Rebellion. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but first let's just finish up covering all of these rules. It says here that after invaders build in a land with 2 or more explorers, you replace all but 1. Now they have to successfully build in order for this to occur. Okay, let's show it what that means. If the Sands on A4 is building, they build like normal. And then every extra explorer in this land gets replaced with the town. So basically the 2 explorers here on the Sands becomes 2 towns. And just to review one more time, we have 2 explorers in our Sands. The Sands is building, it builds like normal, and then every additional explorer becomes a town. And it gets replaced. Now, if we look up here on A7, if a build occurs here, a build has occurred. Now, every extra explorer besides 1 gets replaced, all but 1, it says here. So this explorer does not get replaced with the town. It's important to point out that after the build occurs, for instance, on A7, once we do that a replacement, any status effects on the replaced explorer still stay. So if I had a strife on this explorer on A4, if I replace this explorer with the town, the strife stays on that town. Same thing if I did damage to that town as well. Or I actually, in this case, if I damaged the explorer, it would actually just die. But I guess there would be some weird cases where maybe you get like an event where explorers have extra health and so forth like that. But the damage would stick. Now, it says specifically here, after invaders build. So there has to be a successful build, which means if I have a disease, let's say, in A4, and they're building in sands, that disease gets canceled because it stops the build. Well, now there's no replacement that occurs here because there's no successful build. The same thing goes with, for instance, a spirit that may have like a build skip, like Fangs with Prey on Builders, where it says if target land has a beast, invaders do not build there. If you skip the build, you also skip the replacement. Okay. France 2 is probably the most challenging rule on France, and that's because this is how it mainly pressures that loss condition. France 3, it says early plantations. During setup, add 2 more towns. 1 town to the highest number of land without towns, and then 1 town to land 1. You could see here on board A, we've already done that. We've added the town to A1, and we've also added that town over here to A7. It's important to point out that the towns added for France 3 count towards your town limit. So if I'm looking at board A here, I have a total of a total of 7 towns that this spirit on board A is allocated. Now 3 towns start on the board, which means I only can allow 4 towns to be built. Otherwise, once I exceed those 4 towns, I then lose the game because of that loss condition. France 4, and this is called triangle trade. When invaders build a coastal city, add a town to the adjacent land with the fewest towns. This is very important because on France 3, it says it adds a town to that land 1. So now, A1, if this land comes up, this is a triangle trade land. So once this land builds, if this mountain builds, it's going to build that coastal city from France 4, and then I have to add a town to an adjacent land. Now it's just 1 town, but you could see how I then have a choice on which land I want to add it to. You want to prevent triangle trades at all costs because it's a way that France pushes or pressures the player more. There is a little trick where you can triangle trade into a land that's empty, and then you're doing this to kind of prevent a future explorer, if that makes sense. So now let's say if it's wetlands explorer, now that there's a building here, only 1 explorer gets explored and not 2. And you might say, okay, well, that's still bad. They're building a city. Well, like I said earlier, the main way that players lose is because of the France loss condition. And now when this builds, it's going to look like a town explorer city, which is only 1 town, instead of the explorer 2 towns. So this has 1 extra town, but it has less damage, but it's pressuring that loss condition. So part of if you are unfortunate and you have to take a triangle trade, keep that in mind, kind of planning how you want to triangle trade, and then maybe try to dodge those extra explorers from France 1. Now, after France 4, there's a significant decrease in difficulty. Or when I say decrease in difficulty, I mean that the adversary doesn't get any more challenging. That's because France 5, all this says is that whenever you heal Blight, it goes onto the card, and then it doesn't get re-added to the Blight card until there's 3 per player. Now, in order for you to actually make use of that, you would need to heal a ton of Blight, and it's better to play proactive than reactive against France. For instance, it's better to stop the builds, stop the ravages, than try to heal a bunch of Blight and have that put on the card. And like I mentioned earlier, the main way that players lose against France is because of the France loss condition and not because of Blight. So there really is no added difficulty spike when you go to France 5. Now you do get to add that extra fear card that you have to chew through into stage 2, or into tier level 2, but most of the time that doesn't matter. And then finally, the France 6 rule, where once again, it's a very minor increase in difficulty. It actually it's more of a complexity issue. It's just more things to track, and it doesn't really add much difficulty. It says after resolving an explore card, now this would occur turn 1, which is funny. So France 1 does not occur on turn 1, but France 6 does. So that's just a little confusing for players. It says on each board, add an explorer to a land without any explorers. Fear cards can never remove explorers whenever you would remove an explorer via fear card, you may push it instead. Um, Pretty much this has very minimal effect. I mean, there will be times where it comes up, but it won't actually impact the board directly. The extra explorer that you're adding every turn, it tends to add about 1 town extra on your board per game. Sometimes if you're unlucky, it may add 1 to 3. If you're unlucky, or if you are lucky, it will add 0. And just to review what that is for France 6, whenever after you explore, so let's say mountain is the first explorer, we then have to France 6. We choose a land on board A that doesn't have explorers, and then we France 6 there. So the order in which I like to France 6 is I first France 6 into my disease land because there's a disease, which will better stop that build. After that, I then France 6 into an empty beast land. The idea is that maybe I'll get beast damage so that that beast will kill that extra explorer. Then after that, I like to France 6 into an empty ravaging land. So for instance, let's say mountain ravaged. I cleared my mountain on A6, and then we explored sands here. When I France 6, I'm going to France 6 into my mountain here on A6 such that my Dahan can easily trade with the explorer on A6. So that's the order which I like to France 6. And I like to France 6 a lot of times into my disease land, mainly because of some events. We have Grim Toll, and it says on each board, choose a land with disease. In that land, 2 damage to invaders and 2 damage to the Han. A card like this, Grim Toll, allows this disease to have action, to kill those explorers, and to kind of whittle that land down. So it's basically free damage. Another one is Fatality's Rise. It says in each land with disease, 1 damage to each invader, which means if you have a ton of explorers in your land A2, your disease land, this 1 disease will slaughter all of those explorers. And those are from these 2 events. Okay, so let's take a look at France 2 again, and let's talk about the Slave Rebellion and what is it. Slave Rebellion, it comes up in stage 1 and 2, and then it comes up in stage 3. The stage 1 and 2 says that on each board, add a strife to a town. After finishing the event card, draw another event. Then the bottom, it says aid the uprising. Invaders with strife take 1 damage per Dahan present. The town, if any buildings die, add a Dahan per building destroyed. Now, this is going to be put underneath the top 3 event cards. So it's going to always line up with your final stage 1 card when this card ravages. In addition, once it gets reshuffled into the deck, it will line up with the final stage 2 card. And when that card ravages. So let me just kind of show what that looks like here. So we flipped up this Jungle Explorer. So let's say Mountain Explored. And let's say Ravaged. Then Sands Explored. We cleared this. We let that build. And now Jungle Explored. So now it looks like this with Jungle. So when this jungle is ravaging, that is when the Slave Rebellion is going to come up. So the reason why that is important and that knowledge is key is because I'm looking at this board here and I can plan for the Slave Rebellion to occur on my A3. Now it says I'll add a stripe to a town and the town will die with aid the uprising. So let's kind of visualize how that looks. So we know the jungle is going to build like normal. And now I know the Slave Rebellion will be on this land right when it ravages. So I'm going to add that strife to the town. The town will then die. And then I'll add a Dahan to that land. So basically, I can plan, okay, I only need to defend 2 here instead of a defend 4. So it allows you to kind of make a little bit better strategic decisions on how you want to solve lands because you know when it's coming up. It's very important for the stage 3 because once you reach that stage 3, it says on each board you get to destroy a single town. You then get to add strife to any 2 buildings, that means including cities. Each invader with strife takes a damage, and then you also get aid the uprising. Invaders with strife take damage per Dahan present. This stage 3 effect allows a lot of spirits to close out the game right before they reach stage 3. And a lot of times, I know I have a stage 2 card here, but this should actually be a stage 3. But because of this final action here, this allows a lot of spirits to really not get destroyed because stage three puts a lot of pressure, and a lot of times players just outright lose because they end up exceeding that town limit once they reach stage three. Okay, so let's look at a couple other things as I'm slowly making this change. There we go. Okay, so there is one type of thing that can occur, and that's I call it the back to back, and that's basically after your first, or not your first, your last stage one explore. Sometimes the exact same stage card will come up, and the reason why that's important is because that's going to cause an immediate escalation in that land. And just review what the escalation is. It says that after exploring on each board, pick a land of the shown terrain. If it has buildings, add a blight. Otherwise, add a town. Why is that important? Well, likely when there's a back to back, especially right here, because this is your slave rebellion turn, it's likely both lands are going to have buildings. Which means if the back to back occurs, so jungle would explore, explore, explore. Since both lands have buildings, I have to add a instant blight. And while adding that blight isn't devastating, it's just something to keep in mind that this back to back can occur right early on in from the transition from stage one to stage two. Now it also can occur with like coasts followed by a stage two, but it's less likely to be as impactful compared to the stage one to stage two transition. Looking at some events, I put these as some devastating events for when you're playing against France. The first, well, actually the last three here, we have map makers, frontier calls, and fortune seekers. Actually, there's one more. Let me grab it. Okay. And the last one is wave of reconnaissance. But basically, all four of these events, they have one thing in common, and that is adding a lot of explorers. So map makers, it says ignore wilds during the explore step, and it says on each board without wilds, explore actions add more explorers. Why is that why is that a big problem? Well, now, after some explorers occur on my board, if we have a map makers this turn, oh look, triple explorers now pop up on my wetland, and then now two explorers pop up on my inlet on my coastal wetland, and that can be a big problem because this can heavily pressure that loss condition here with of the 7 towns. Frontier calls. This is basically just France number one, except more explorers. It doubles down on those empty lands. Fortune seekers. This is can be pretty devastating. It does come with a grim toll, which is nice, but it says the next explore card matches all lands without buildings, and it's a France. It's France explorers. So if I'm playing on board A and we get fortune seekers, well now I get two explorers in all lands without buildings. So as you can see, that could be pretty devastating for some spirits. Can throw them significantly behind tempo wise. Wave of Reconnaissance, it only can occur in stage one, so there's a very small window when this card pops up. I believe it's only one turn, but yeah, it's still painful when it does because more explorers is not good. I also put this card here, and it's mainly for that lingering plagues or pretty much that disease event. Any disease event that ignore builds can cost you the game with with France, and that's just because you're planning around these disease to kind of prevent or keep the lands in check. And if you ever get a disease ignore, now there's a couple, I'm not sure the exact number, I haven't gone through the deck, but I think it's like 5+, 5 or 6. And if that occurs, that might cause a ton of extra builds, and that may just put you over that town limit and cost you to lose the game. So these are just some events that may come up. There are plenty of more events. Any event that adds towns or like population rises, stuff like that. Like what else? Temporary truce. Anything that keeps buildings around can cause some significant problems for beating this adversary. Now, we talked about slave rebellion, and it says you're adding strife, and then invaders with strife take damage. So that means spirits that can use strife and add strife are going to be very powerful here. For instance, trickster that can add plenty of strife, or maybe lightning pandemonium, or maybe madness shadows, or maybe you draft a miner like fire in the sky, if I can type correctly, like fire in the sky. Basically, any event or even fear cards that add strife, miners, anything that adds strife is going to be very powerful against France and can really help spirits gain a lot of tempo. Looking at all of the boards here, I have all 8 boards, including the horizon boards in the upper right. You're going to notice I have on some boards, there are, well, every board will have that pink square, and then there are some boards with the circle, with the red circles. Um, Basically, there's 2 types of boards against France, and that's boards that have the towns split onto 3 different land types. And these are your better boards. And mainly, by doing this, you're going to be facing down more cities and less towns. But like I said, the main way that players lose against France is this town limit that pushes to, it ends up pushing, and that's the way that they lose the game. If you look at, for instance, board F here, you're going to notice that both of the towns lined up on the same land type, which means this board tends to be more swingy because look at the red circles. That means when there's explored mountains, oh look, I'm now facing down 4 town builds, which a lot of times will just cause players to instantly lose. So you have board F, board B, board G, and board H. These all have that land type where it's actually just sands and mountains, which is pretty funny. But this is where there's the towns have lined up on the same land type, which leaves there to be an empty land type. And it's not like you're going to like always lose because that explorer comes up. It just means it's going to pressure that town limit a lot more than, let's say, a board like board A or a board like board C. I've outlined the town on land 1 just to kind of indicate that's going to be your triangle trade land. So if that land comes up, your game is going to be harder because you're going to be facing down that triangle trade. That city's going to get built. It's going to add another town. It's going to pressure your town limit. It's going to pressure your city limit. So, or not your city limit, but just pressure you based on having more cities, harder for you to defend lands, stuff like that. Against France, it's really important to be proactive. We need to be playing cards that impact the board, just like Prussia. When I've went through cards, I'm going to go through some cards now, but you can't afford to be playing blight removal cards or just like cards that are slower pace. Now, cards that add disease, those have a lot more value here. Defends are always great, but defending lands and not getting a counterattack is not what you should be doing. So let's take a look. We're going to do some drafts now. We'll do this first draft. And these are some incredible cards. We have Pact of the Joint Hunt, Prowling Panthers, Treacherous Waterways, and Ever Twisting Trail. Once again, Prowling Panthers, this is a card. You don't want it here. I think this is one of the worst miners in the game. I'm actually in the process of making my miner power tier list, but this is just a terrible card. All 3 of these cards, the rest of these set, I can definitely see these cards working. Treacherous Waterways, Wilds is really good here. And this is the difference between Prussia and France. A Wild stops both explorers from occurring. And that can basically insulate lands. Very powerful. It's 0 cost. Pact of the Joint Hunt. It allows you to do some Dahan manipulation, Dahan damage, Dahan setup. Excellent for comboing with cards like Slave Rebellion, Ever Twisting Trail, also being able to gather, push explorers, isolate lands. Very, very strong. Important to point out, I did not mention this previously, but France 6, it's an explorer add. So even if you isolate a land, you still have to add that explorer from France 6. Let's draft another set of miners. Oh, I think I'm sitting down in the spot. Let's grab here white. Let's grab a miner. Okay, we got Inflame, Pull Beneath, Entrancing, and Drought. All of these cards definitely worth considering. Drought, killing 3 towns and slow, excellent. Yes, it adds a blight. That's okay. Remember, the way we're going to lose these games is going to be the town limit, not the blight, not losing to blight. Trancing Apparitions, Really, it's that bottom part. If no invaders are present, gather two explorers, basically allowing you to stop a complete France build. Um, for instance, on like board F, you'd be able to pull both explorers out of your F4, stopping that build. Pull beneath, doing 1 to 2 damage. Stop that, basically stopping a France build. If you have two explorers, let's say in your mountain, actually, let's say wetland here, and you play pull beneath in the slow, you'll be able to take out this wetland. And then in flame, it's a strife add, it's a disease add. This card is excellent here. You can add that disease so that you can, like I said, stop the France 2 build, or you can add that strife to help combo with the Slave Rebellion. I would definitely go with Inflame here if I was drafting, but it's also very spirit dependent. We have Sap, Haunted, Guardian Serpents, and Blood Draws. These are all interesting cards. I think it would be very spirit dependent, though Sap is the best card of the four. It's a 0 cost, defend 5. It's excellent. You might be able to make an argument for Blood Draws depending on the spirit, but Sap for sure. Defend is king. Let's take a look at a couple more drafts. We have Rain of Blood, Call to Migrate, Steam Vents, and Flow Down River. Call to Migrate, this awkward Dahan movement for 1 energy. This is just not good enough here. Rain of Blood, 3 fear, not good enough. Against France, you got to be very proactive. You have to impact the board with every action. So we're left with Steam Vents and Flow Down River. Both of them are solid picks. I think a largely would be dependent on the spirit I'm playing. Steam Vents allowing you to kill those towns fast if you have the 3 Earth, but Flow Down River is cheaper. So really just depends on the spirit I'm playing. We'll do one more. We have Mez, Unquenchable Flame, Entrap, and Voracious Growth. Entrap tends to be too slow in this matchup. I mean, it's Blight movement for 1 energy, but I mean, it could be necessary depending on the spirit. Unquenchable Flame's also a bit too slow. I really like Mez. Mez is a phenomenal pickup. It's an isolate. It's essentially a defend. Yeah, what's not to love? Voracious Growth. It's 2 damage or blight removal. It's okay. But like I said, I'm probably gonna grab Mez here. Okay, so some final thoughts here. France is actually one of my least favorite adversaries outside of Habsburg. Mainly, the big problem with France is I find that the loss condition is too brutal on players. Sometimes there's nothing they could do. There's some terrible explorers, maybe like Coast comes up with like a Fortune Seekers or a Frontier Calls, and then they're facing down so many builds on the coast. And yes, there is ways to play around that, of course. And that's something that I'll show you in my videos, and I try to show that. But it's just sometimes it's too much. In addition, I find that France 6 and France 5 and France 6 don't add enough to the adversary in terms of difficulty. I know it says this is difficulty 10, France 6, but a lot of times I tell players I think this is a lot more difficult than Sweden. Sweden is like diff 8. All right, let me rephrase. This is easier than Sweden, and Sweden is more challenging than France. A lot of times, Sweden is difficulty 8, and I think France 6 is probably around difficulty 8 as well, except there's these weird chances where you just instantly lose because of bad RNG due to events. But I really, if I were to make like a change to the adversary, I would increase this town limit. I'd make it like at least 9, maybe 10, and then I would definitely make 5 and 6 much more challenging. Give the players more freedom with the defend, more freedom with that town limit, but then add more teeth with 5 and 6. And even I've definitely talked about with my play group about just having like level 6 be just like don't play with the Slave Rebellion. And there's a couple other things that I also did to level 6 to make it more aggressive. And I find that that would make the adversary more challenging. Currently, based on the spirits that exist, I believe there's only a couple spirits that have a bad France matchup. I think I really can't name them completely. I know Finder, it could be a little tricky with the explorers. Really, Earthquake. So Earthquake is one of the new nature incarnate spirits. That's the one spirit that actually really has a tough France matchup, and once again, it's because that loss condition is just really tough for it. But really, every other spirit just kind of crumbles this thing. And some spirits like Trickster can basically play two boards and solve them just because of the strife adds. So I really wish there's a couple changes to it. I do enjoy playing the adversary with a lot of spirits, and I like that a lot of spirits are viable into it and feel fun to play. The last thing I want to cover, and I just thought of this right now, and that's kind of dealing with an early coast card. So a mistake that a lot of players make is they end up clearing out these coastal lands when the ravages occur, and sometimes that is the right play, but sometimes it's best just to leave the buildings there because when this coast card comes up, it's like if, let's say, all of these lands were clear, right? And now the coast card comes up, you're now getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're facing down 6 towns on your board, and a lot of times, if you haven't planned slow cards correctly or planned for this possibility, you're just dead because you can't stop 6 town builds from popping up on your board. So some ways to kind of prevent that from occurring is just leaving some of the buildings on your coast. It's okay if you take blight here. Um, Maybe like on this land, I defend it, but I trade with the town, so maybe it looks like this. I defend 5, I kill the town, and then I leave the city. And basically I'm just stalling the game out. I know that once we get to that second slave rebellion here, we'll be able to kill the city in the follow-up. So just keep that in mind when you're playing against France. I hope this video helps somebody that's looking for more of a France overview. I'll be doing a playthrough guide with levels 1 through 6 in the coming days. I'll see you guys in the next video.